This is my presentation on the practical aspects of entrepreneurship with disabilities, managing chronic conditions while earning an income. I'm going to talk about the philosophies of chronic management, bias checking, and planning and preparing. In my philosophies of chronic management, I came up with 8 somehow. And I read them again as I had made this a year ago, and I find them still very applicable. First, it's all manageable. Second, be kind with yourself and gentle with others. Third, self-care is a matter of life or suffering. Fourth, suffering is a normal part of life. Fifth, you can be physically ill and keep mentally well. Sixth, always remember your worth while acknowledging your handicaps. Seventh, it's normal to feel alone and misunderstood. Eighth, always keep hope and everyday magic about you. You can almost replace the word handicaps with limitations here because we're going to talk about limitations. So I'll probably change that for the next time. When talking about these philosophies, I'd like you to ask yourself, what philosophy bothered you the most? Because sometimes it's not about which philosophy made you really excited, but which one bothered you, because it can be a sign. Like feeling bothered by something is not inherently good or bad. It's actually a signal. And here it's a signal of a personal misconception or barrier that is occurring internally that can be sorted out to be able to move forward from it. Find an adaptation to it. So it's important to start with your bias. I say start with your bias because it's like any good research project. The researchers have to acknowledge their bias before they begin in order for it to be well-rounded and turn out. So we start with your bias. So here are some biases that I've come up with, and they're kind of harsh truths sometimes too, in a way. So first one is, yes, how you feel about your condition will directly impact how you handle it. So you have to get honest with yourself. I will start. If I ignore it being the pain or misery or depression or whatever it has been, it is better, but worse in that if I ignore it on the short term, I will pay for it on the long term. So it has to be dealt with, otherwise it festers. Another one is sometimes it takes 48 hours to feel the effects of the efforts of a particularly eventful day, be it mentally or physically. It could be up to 2 days later before I'm like, oh my God, why am I so tired? So I didn't do anything yesterday. No, I did something 2 days ago. Right. So what all these biases mean, what these all mean for me is that I have got to think of what is going on for today, 3 days ahead, and a week ahead, plus medical appointment planning, and go with flow all at once. And this is where planning and preparing is actually very beneficial for me in adaptation. I'd like you to think about some biases that you personally hold when it comes to your own health management. Perhaps write them down. Limitations. When I was saying earlier about acknowledging your handicaps, well, it's about acknowledging your limitations. I use this term very carefully, knowing in my own experiences that the term limitations can generate different feelings. It can be, you know, different places have different definitions of limitations, such as insurance companies and government systems. And what we have to remember with limitations, though, is that each limitation, there's an adaptation to be found. You break your right arm, you learn to write with your left. You need to be sure that you're always on certain side of the classroom or in the meeting room. So you arrive 15 minutes early. Because limitations is a neutral word. You have to be honest about it and just figure out how to adapt about it and communicate it sometimes too. So if you could sum up your limitations, what would you say your biggest limitation would be? And it might be multiple. Jot them down, write them down. because those limitations are essential to figuring out the planning and preparing. In planning and preparing, it's important to get informed, understand what your limitations are, um, and figure out what more do you need to understand about your conditions to allow for a better quality of life. Perhaps it's talking to different groups. Perhaps it's talking to your doctors, occupational therapists, other people that have lived with lived experiences. There are so many forums and Facebook groups, and most importantly, yourself. As much as all those other stories and what other people can tell you happens, it really comes down to yourself, of how you understand your own condition and what things you run into on a daily basis. Because it could be things that you've naturally adapted to in your own home, but once taken into another situation, it's like, oh no, I don't have this. Little silly things I do is I have a little cat post, and I have troubles with my back with going from the washer to the dryer. Move the little cat post over there and I sit down. So if there's certain tasks going on, like when I was working in the library, I had troubles getting down to the lower shelves. I would use the stool. I would find one of they would have stools to roll around for the shelvers, and I'd find one of those to be able to sit down to be able to do it. Now, if all of a sudden one wasn't there, I would then have to go ask. So for yourself, what are some tried and true pieces of advice or things that you have found to be able to manage your own chronic illnesses? And with that in mind, what is one piece of advice you would give anyone to manage their own business and themselves with chronic illnesses and disabilities? So that was the PowerPoint. And this is a part of one of my original projects. I kept calling all the disability things I was doing my Silly Wings projects. And they're really all the Unlibrarian. It's all the Unlibrarian now. And I hope to be able to do more with these. I am really happy